Okay, we're back. This is part two of supporting materials for your speech. Professor Barry Brennan talking to my public speaking class. And we left off with testimony. We talked about the difference between lay and expert testimony. And now we're going to be looking at, there we go, statistics. Okay, statistics. These are going to be really important for you. We live in a world where we want to know what are the statistics about how many people are drug addicts. How much is that's how we make decisions. We make decisions. We make policy decisions based upon how many people are affected by certain things, right? Or how many incidents. Think about what's happening now in our society that people are finally looking at the lack of training, or the police, the force use the unnecessary force. Probably, I'm not a police officer, so I'm not going to speak at length about that, but it appears that in many cases there's unnecessary brutal force used by police officers in capturing people that are suspects. And so one of the ways that policy gets changed, for example, would be that they need to find the statistics. How many people in this, in particular, what we're seeing in society is how many young black men and older black men are that's happening to them. So they need to know, they show it because it's been happening, right? But which is a whole other topic. But the point is, they want to look at the statistics. How often is it happening? That's what it tells us. We like to know numbers, and then we need to put numbers in context. Okay, so when you're using statistics, we want to know it in context. So if we're saying, 55% of white women in Fresno are over the age of 35. I just made that up. So that says something right there. We kind of have an idea. In Fresno, we know it's Fresno, California. If they say that Fresno, California, we have an idea. Okay, 55% of white women in Fresno, California are over the age of 35. Okay, that's actually a pretty detailed statistic. Okay, we don't know anything about their economic situation or anything like that, but we have an idea. Okay. Now, if we just said 55% of white women are over the age of 35, actually just say there are more than half of the women, more than half of the women that live in Fresno are over the age of 35. Let's just say that. Let's say I just said that. So that tells you something about women and their ages. And if you're young and you're looking to date someone, like, you have 45% that are under 35, that we make that assumption, right? But it doesn't say anything about their ethnicity or race, right? So there are things that are missing. So what you need to say in terms of statistics and what context and what details we need to know will be up to you. But you do need to put it in the context. It has to be relevant to what you're talking about. So we often talk about statistics in terms of percentages. We talk about in ratio to something else, right? Let's say we're going to look at 65% of Latina women in California live in the Central Valley. I just made that up. Okay. In comparison to 65% of African American women live in the southeastern part of the country, right? That's a ratio. We're kind of looking at, like, or we're making a comparison, right? Comparison to those geographical areas and the people that live there. And then if we're going to look at a ratio, let's take that a step farther, because I don't think I explained that well. If we're going to look at a ratio, then maybe you want to look at the economic ratio. Like, let's say 65% of African American women in the United States live in the southeastern part of the United States. Okay. And then we say, of that 65%, or of those African American women that live, the 65%, 75% of those women are middle class or above. Okay. And then, so I still am not giving a good ratio. You might, but you have to break that down, right? That 75% out of 65. But 75% is basically 3 out of 4. You could say 3 out of 4 women, there's your ratio. 3 out of 4 women of the 65% of women that live in the southeastern part of the United States that are Black, they are middle class or above. There's your ratio. You probably say it better than that. Here's the thing. You see how confusing that could be? Y'all are like going, what is she talking about? I'm confused. This is why you're confused, because I gave you a bunch of numbers. And this is what happens when we talk about statistics and numbers, is we try to conceptualize, which you just saw me do as I tried to figure out in my mind how I was going to say that. We try to conceptualize those amounts. So talking about percentages, ratios, and rounding off numbers is helpful when you're talking about statistics if you're going to talk about them just verbally, right? If you're just going to talk about them and not have a chart. But the best way to talk about them is to create a graph or chart. Okay? The best way to talk about statistics and do comparison is to create a graph or chart, because not only can you talk about them, but we can see them. And that is truly, 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 truly helpful. Okay. I said this early on when I first started this conversation. Context is everything. You can't just throw statistics at us and expect us to understand what is it relevant. If you talk about 65% of white women in California are over the age of 50, right? Okay. What is that relevant? Is that relevant when we're talking about meth, if your topic was methamphetamine? No, so you have to put it in context its relevance. Remember that we're not inside your head. We can't read your mind. So make sure you keep making sure that it's explainable and makes sense and you've put it in the context. But statistics I can't say enough of. They're really, really important. But you don't want to give us long lists. You don't want to you need to round off numbers. If you have a number like 25,872 people voted in Fresno County last year. I'm just making this up. Rather than saying 25,872, just say almost 26,000 or almost 26K. We know what that K means, 1,000. Okay? Rounding off will help us rather than saying all those numbers. You got me? Cool. Okay. Moving on. Narratives. Narratives are stories. We tell stories all the time, right? Think about when y'all sit around with your friends and you just gossip about people, you're telling stories. We do it all the time. We love stories. Why do we love stories? Because we're storytelling people. We are actually human beings, are storytelling creatures. So you want to keep doing your stories. They could be, the story has to support your topic. So let's just say, rather you didn't have testimony from a drug addict, but let's just say you gave a story, told us an imaginary story about someone who used meth and what happened to them. Like a day in the life of JoJo, who's a meth addict on the streets of San Francisco, and how she started, and then what happened to her, and then what she ended up doing, right? It's an imaginary story, but it could serve a purpose to help you give your speech. So you can use that narrative as an attention getter. When I talked about attention getters, that's in your introduction, right? They can be short narratives within the body of your speech, or it can be anecdotal, which means it's just like a brief little story, something that usually relates to personal experience. Analogies. So analogies are based upon when you look at two things that are similar to each other and you're comparing them. The key to analogies is we need to be familiar with what that is, you're making that comparison. It can't be something that we don't know about. So here we are. So we've got literal analogy and figurative analogy. So a literal analogy is when you're comparing two things in the same category. Okay, so apples and oranges, why? Because they're in the same category, they're both a fruit. This is really important if you're actually doing a true comparative speech or doing comparison, that they need to be, when you're comparing things, if you're trying to actually talk about the advantage of one or the other, they have to be in the same category. So that's what I mean by literal analogy. But we like analogies because it helps us understand something better by comparing it to something else. Now, the figurative analogy is when you compare two different things to help explain something else. Now, I used the pen and the sword, right? The pen is mightier than the sword. And they're two different things, but they are used to compare each other because both has a way of expressing or trying to create change, right? A sword's pretty final in its change, but a pen, that's your self-expression to move things forward, or your voice also can be sharp, right? Can make people feel like they're going to die if, depending on your voice. But the point is, both of them you can fight with words or you can fight with a weapon. All right. So when you make analogies, you want to make sure that it's from other material presented, meaning it relates to your overall topic, that it makes sense, and that, let's go back, I apologize, that it comes from experiences, common experiences and traditions we have as a people living here in Fresno County, in the United States, in California, and in Mexico, in places where, you know, our cultural experience and understanding comes from. Okay, it has to be related to that so we can understand it. And I say Mexico because this is there's a strong Mexican heritage here in Fresno. And no matter what color you are, this is an influence. If you live in California or in Southern California, this is an influence that you have as part of your life experience, no matter what color you are. Okay. Okay, final tips, and then we're going to finish this up. Make sure that your supporting materials, it's credible. It's coming from a credible source. Use a variety. Don't be stingy. Don't just tell us stories. Give us some statistics. Give us some examples. You know, remember, you're making a dish, right? Your speech is like a dish. Make it flavorful. Add different things to it. Don't give us any long lists. Don't just list a whole bunch of things. Boring. We won't care. We're going to check out. Right? Your job is to win the audience, the agreement with the audience, to get us on board with your speech, be interested in you. Don't do any long lists. And finally, when you're doing your speech and you're writing it, think about how much time you have. Think about if your next speech is going to be 5 to 7 minutes, you have that amount of time. Don't go overboard in the supporting materials. Don't give us too much information. Don't make us listen to your speech for 10 minutes. We don't want to hear it for 10 minutes. We're coming to your speech to listen to it for 5 to 7 minutes. Keep that time frame out of respect for your audience and respect for the assignment. That's it. I'm going to stop now. Y'all can do this. I'm looking forward to your next speeches.